Hello, this is One Ping Only, and welcome back to part 2 of my coverage of battles in Berlin, courtesy of Combat Mission Red Thunder and the Fire and Rubble module. In part 1, I covered my attack as the Soviets against German defenders played by Stafford from thefewgoodmen.com, and I won that battle, although not overwhelmingly due to some fumbling by yours truly. I also covered my German defense against a Soviet attack by Artkin, which I completely and totally lost. As an aside, I forgot to thank Artkin and Stafford for their good games against me in the first video, so thank you, gentlemen. Given that the Soviets won both of my tournament battles, in this video we'll explore what it would take for the Germans to turn the tables. To start, let's go back to what didn't work in my initial German defense and what worked better for Stafford in his defense. First, we established that lone German squads, or even platoons without heavy support, could not survive long against a mass of Soviet submachine gun squads. Second, defending all 3 objective zones was not viable with the forces available. He who defends everything defends nothing. It seems like Stafford was onto something with his strongpoint defense. So I tested this out using the apartment complex as my strongpoint and hoping to inflict enough casualties to force a draw. The apartments are ringed in barbed wire. This will slow down or stop infantry in the middle of kill zones, and mines are used to fill in the gaps. Infantry with motivation modifiers are placed in frontline positions, but most of my infantry and a flak Vierling are behind the first line of buildings. The Soviets open their attack with tank support and area fire from nearby buildings that force my troops to go to ground. I get some devastating flamethrower attacks in on Soviet troops staging to attack, but the Soviets advance just the same. My flak gun also engages the gathering enemy, but it's not very effective and gets suppressed and then knocked out early on. With none of my forces able to engage or distract them, the Soviets are able to attack the apartments in force from 2 directions. And of course, the initial wave strikes no mines. The main attack comes from the south, and once that force hits my barbed wire and the mines around it, it's a bit of a different story. The Soviets take high casualties, and many of them get pinned. But they can afford that, and some start to get through, driving a wedge in between my forces. Even worse, the buildings in the front have fallen through a combination of Soviet maneuver and also use of breaching charges. This opens up new angles on my troops defending the rear area, and they quickly become pinned. The Soviets now focus their attention on the rear of the apartment stronghold. Although my forces in the back of the objective have the Soviet infantry reasonably pinned, the Soviet tanks are a different story. They take out the building that is the cornerstone of my defense. Soviet engineers come forward and lay even more breach charges. All of the main apartment buildings are now in Soviet hands, and it's not looking good for the stronghold. The last few defenders at the north and the west edges of the apartment objective are overcome. So my strong point defense didn't work any better than the previous defense. I even replayed and added some bunkers. Bunkers do not appear to offer substantially more protection than the surrounding buildings. Soviet SMG infantry can deliver such a volley of fire through the embrasure that the occupants are killed or they flee. So the lesson here is that a static defense is always going to fail. The enemy can mass forces and choose their place to attack. The defender is going to have to get more aggressive and proactive. This time we're going to change our thinking completely and go full German. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, during the war, the Germans commonly would abandon a position, register artillery on those positions, bombard the enemy when they took over the positions, and then counterattack the enemy before they can establish defensive positions. So how did that work in the game? The initial assault by Flammpanzer IIIs is highly effective. The German infantry, however, remain very vulnerable, and there's not a lot of them. It's not a loss rate that's sustainable. But working in concert with the armor, the infantry are able to make inroads into the objective. Panzerschreck teams do their job and open up the path for the Flammpanzers to advance. My two Flammpanzers wreak havoc on the Russian defenders. Under the pinning effect of artillery, my troops continue to move up. Initial Soviet attempts to reinforce the objective are rebuffed. Still the Soviets come, putting the hurt on the weakest part of my force, my infantry. One keyholed SMG squad inflicts a lot of casualties. At least until armor shows up to save the day. But the Soviets have a whole map worth of infantry to throw into this final objective. And with me not having any blocking forces elsewhere on the map, they're free to do this. And so, even though my armor is able to mitigate much of the Soviet infantry, and is reasonably invulnerable, other than exposed crew members, I just don't have enough strength to move forward and completely clear this objective. The Soviets are simply dug in too tight, and my infantry insufficient to advance. This game still ends in a Soviet major victory. While I was able to inflict significant losses on the Soviet troops in that final objective, I could not push them out of the objective entirely, and so it remained contested. Also, I was unable to contest the other two objectives that were already in Soviet hands. So while this certainly felt better than waiting to be bludgeoned to death by the Soviets, for this to work, the Soviets really have to arrive on the objective in a weakened state already. And that means trying to find some way to cause a mass casualty event. Not every opponent is going to be as obliging as I was in self-creating a mass casualty event. So how do we go about making one? One way of creating a mass casualty event, or significant interdiction of enemy movement, is the use of artillery. If you can catch your opponent in the open, it can be devastating. But with 5 to 10 minute call-in time, it's difficult to get the artillery on target at the opportune moment. And if the target infantry is in some of the substantial buildings on this map, even heavier shells may cause no casualties at all. So honestly, it's probably best to use it as an area denial weapon. Air power is another option to consider, but its effectiveness is very random. Sometimes bombs hit and kill things that are very important. Other times they are very ineffective for the cost. And in an infantry-heavy game, strafing may be as effective as bombs, as long as it's not friendly fire. Anti-tank mines can be effective, but they are very expensive, and it's impossible to mine all avenues of approach. Even then, some tanks will drive right through the minefield. Mining an entire road costs about 100 points. Large minefields can be very effective on this map. They can definitely surprise an opponent who is moving quickly and en masse. This can prevent the SMG squads from quickly overpowering the defenders. Here you can see the impact of the mine and ambush combination on an assault force. Another way to cause mass casualties in advance of the Soviets getting to your lines is to launch an attack. Moving your troops out of their starting zones and into the path of the oncoming enemy is a great way to surprise your opponent. Meat Eater, one of the players over at A Few Good Men, demonstrated the power of this spoiling type of attack in one of the tournament matches. He inflicted enough casualties that he won the game. I was not as successful in this version, as my opponent was not completely surprised. The strength of the SMG squads forced an early withdrawal of my attack force. At the same time, I sent my armor forward also to interdict infantry moving through the city. Losses were inflicted in the open, but then infantry dispersed into buildings. As my tanks press deeper into Soviet lines, T-34s come up to intercept them. There's a clash of urban armor. Again, with some casualties inflicted and some sustained, my armor withdraws to a safer location. After a short break to lick their wounds, the Soviet advance resumes. Most of my infantry is able to disengage and move back to the strongpoint. This is just in time. The Soviets are hot on their heels. The enemy suffers attrition from my heroic rearguard troops, but it's a suicidal stand. It doesn't take long for the Soviets to close up along one side of the apartment block objective. Unsurprisingly, the Soviet attack begins with mass quantities of submachine gun fire, supported by flamethrowers. The Luftwaffe finally shows up and destroys a building that has no one inside. No mass casualties there. The rest of the battle is, unfortunately, pretty much like the other defenses that I ran. The Soviets charge, backed up by fire support, and German squads are overwhelmed by Soviet submachine gun squads. This time, the Soviets break into the rear of the apartment complex first. An attempt to take out the devastating flamethrower tanks fails. The defense collapses and is overrun. And with that, resistance in the apartment buildings ends. The Soviets occupy the apartment complex and then the metropole. Then they take out my last panzer and are able to occupy the rear objective. Again, I have failed in the defense. So, ultimately, I didn't crack the nut with an outright success. Perhaps a Soviet attack in this particular circumstance isn't really defensible as compared to, say, a Soviet probe that has a lower points differential between the two sides. But sometimes that's the battle that you have to fight. And there are certainly things that worked better than others that are worth incorporating into your future urban battle plan. The first lesson is, even though this is an urban battle, have an active defense, not a static defense. Figure out how to fight on your terms versus waiting for the submachine gun squads to come kill you. A spoiling attack is not a bad gamble in a hopeless situation. That also means giving ground versus staying in one place and being annihilated. Maintaining a threat in being may be the only way of contesting an additional objective at the end of the game. Second, don't try to defend the entire map or necessarily every objective. Choose a limited number of defensible positions and maximize the fires from and onto those positions. Again, mobile armor can help with this. And my last point would be separate tanks from their infantry. Whether it's anti-tank mines, Panzerfausts and Schrecks, or Panzers, being able to take out enemy armor across that depth from right at the front line to far back from the front line, it's critical. As we've seen, letting enemy armor run amok and providing fire support is a good way to get your force left extra crispy. I hope that you will find some of this useful for the next time you find yourself defending Berlin, or really any city for that matter. As for me, however, I don't really want to see Berlin again for a very long time, unless it's as a tourist. In which case, perhaps you will see me go full German. This is One Ping Only, and as always, feel free to leave constructive criticism and discussion about tactics in the comments section. See you next time, and thanks so much for watching.